Hi, welcome back to Cosmic and Body Horror. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Manly Wade Wellman, May 21, 1903 to April 5, 1986, was an American writer. While his science fiction and fantasy stories appeared in many pulp magazines, Wellman is best remembered as one of the most popular contributors to the legendary Weird Tales and for his fantasy and horror stories set in the Appalachian Mountains, which draw on the native folklore of that region. He also wrote the Cthulhu Mythos stories featuring the Necronomicon. The Terrible Parchment by Manly Wade Wellman. Weird Tales, August, 1937. The author describes this as a Necronomicon story to end all Necronomicon stories. "Here's your Weird Tales," smiled my wife, entering the apartment. "Thanks, Gwen," I said, rising and taking the magazine she held out. "I say, it's surely not the first of the month." "Not for 2 days yet," Gwen assured me. But just as I came to the front door, a funny old man bobbed up with an armful of magazines. Advance copies, I guess. He stuck a copy of Weird Tales right under my nose. I gave him a quarter, and oop! I had opened the magazine, and a page fluttered to the floor. We both stooped for it, both seized it, and we both let go. Gwen gasped and I whistled, for that fallen page had such a clammy, wet feel to it. Dank is the word, I should think. Still stooping, we frowned mystifiedly at each other. Then I conquered my momentary disgust, took hold of it again, and lifted it into the light of my desk lamp. "It's not paper," Gwen said at once. No more it was, and what could it be doing in Weird Tales? Though it looked weird enough, in all conscience. It was a rectangle of tawny, limp parchment, grained on the upper side with scales, like the skin of some unfamiliar reptile. I turned it over, revealing a smoother surface with paw-like markings and lines of faint, rusty scribbling. Arabic, I pronounced at once. "Let's phone for Klein to come over. He reads the stuff." "There's one Greek word," Gwen pointed out. Her pink-tipped forefinger touched the string of capital letters at the upper edge. Necronomicon. Necronomicon, she spelled out. That P would be the letter rho in Greek Necronomicon. "Sounds woodgy, what?" "That's the name of H.P. Lovecraft's book," I told her. "Lovecraft's book?" "Oh yes, I remember. He's always mentioning it in his stories. And lots of Weird Tales authors, Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch and so on, have taken it up," I added. "But Lovecraft imagined the thing, didn't he?" I laid the parchment on the desk, for my fingers still rebelled at its strange dankness. "Yes, Lovecraft imagined it. Describes it as the work of a mad Arab wizard, Abdul al-Hajred, and it's supposed to contain secrets of powerful evils that existed before the modern world. It's already become legendary." Again my wife touched the thing, very gingerly. "But what's it for? Some sort of Valentine or April Fool joke? Stuck in to thrill the If so, it's cleverly made. Looks 1,000,000 years old." We pored over the rusty-looking scrawl of Arabic, our heads close together. It must be a fake, we agreed, yet there was every appearance of age-old fadedness about the ink. "Klein must come over and have a look at it," I reiterated. "He may give some clue as to where it's from and what it was doing in Weird Tales." Gwen was studying the last line of characters. "This part isn't faked," she said suddenly. "Look, the ink is fresh, almost wet, and it's not Arabic, it's Latin." She paused a moment, slowly translating in her mind. "It says, 'Chant out the spell and give me life again.'" She straightened up. "How about a spot of cribbage?" We both sighed with genuine relief as we turned our backs on the parchment. Light as had been our talk, we had been somehow daunted by the sense of mystery that had ridden in upon us. I got the board and the cards, and we began to play on the dining table. 10 minutes later I turned suddenly, as if a noise had come to my mind's ear, and gazed at the desk. The parchment was no longer there. "Look," cried Gwen, "it's blown off on the floor." I rose and picked it up. It felt even more unpleasant than before, and this time it seemed to wriggle in my hand. Perhaps a draft stirred it, but I could detect no draft. Dropping it back on the desk, I weighted it with an ashtray and went back to the game. Gwen beat me soundly, adding to her household money thereby. I taunted her with suggestions of a girlhood misspent at gaming tables, then turned idly to the desk once more. The rectangle of parchment was beside the ashtray, not under it, and that undetectable draft again was sliding ever so deliberately toward the edge of the desk. I swore, or so Gwen insists, and fairly jumped over to seize it. "This is getting ridiculous," Gwen protested, fumbling nervously with the cards on the table. I was studying the thing again. "I thought you said the last line was in Latin," I remarked. "Why, so it is." "No, it's in English." I read it aloud. "Chant out the spell, and give me life again." Hello, the next to the last line is in English too. It also was written with fresh ink, and in a bold hand. "Many minds and many wishes give substance to the worship of Cthulhu." Gwen had come to look over my shoulder. "By heaven, dear, you're right. Many minds but what does Cthulhu mean? Does it have anything to do with the Chthonian gods, the underworld rulers that the ancient Greeks served in fear?" "I shouldn't be surprised," I replied, and it sounded even drier than I had intended. "Cthulhu is a name that Lovecraft and Smith and the others used in their yarns. He's a god of old time, they tell us, and a rank bad one at that." She shuddered, but gamely turned the shudder into a toss of her shoulders. "I suppose," she hazarded, "that the many minds and wishes have given substance to this page of the Necronomicon." "Nonsense. The Necronomicon's only something in Lovecraft stories." "Didn't you just say that it had become a legend among readers of weird fiction?" she reminded, utterly serious. "What's the next step after that?" "What you're trying to suggest," I said, trying to be gaily scornful, "is that so many people have thought and talked about Lovecraft's book that they've actually given it substance." "Something like that," she nodded thoughtfully. Then, more brightly, "Oh, it'll turn out to be a joke or something else anticlimactic." "Right," I agreed readily. "After all, we're not living in a weird tale, you know. If we were, that would explain why there was one last line in Latin before, and now two last lines in English." She warmed to the idea. "You see, it was turning deliberately into a language we could read, when we hesitated over the Latin." "It kindly changed into English," I finished. Again she nodded. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamed of in your philosophy." Trite but true. Still, my name's not Horatio, and it's bedtime. Let's not dream any philosophies that will turn into nightmare. Once more, I picked up that clammy parchment. As for this creation of many minds, or what have you, I'm putting it under stoppages. Opening the big dictionary that lies on a stand beside my desk, I laid the parchment inside and closed the heavy book upon it. There it stays until we get Klein here tomorrow. And now to bed. To bed we went, but not to sleep. Gwen squirmed and muttered, and I was weary in every portion of my body save the eyelids. We got up once for sandwiches and milk, and a second time for aspirin. A third time we lay down, and I, at least, dozed off. I started awake to the pressure of Gwen's fingers on my shoulder. "I think," she began tensely. Then I heard what she had heard, a faint, stealthy rustle. I reached for the light cord above the bed and gave it a jerk. The room sprang into radiance, and through the open door I could see the parlor. I sat up in bed staring. Something hung down from between the leaves of the dictionary by the desk, something that moved even as I made it out. Something that would be rectangular if laid flat, but which was now limper, more flexible than the wettest rag, that seemed to flow from its narrow prison like a trickle of fluid filth. "It's getting away," breathed Gwen almost inaudibly. "It's going to come here for us." The parchment worked its last corner free and dropped to the floor with a fleshy slap, as though it had soft weight. It began to move across the rug toward the bedroom door, toward us. I dare say I might be able to describe painstakingly its appearance as it moved, how it humped up in the middle and laid its corners to the floor like feet. But how can I convey the heart-stopping nastiness of it? How visualize for you the animosity and sense of wicked power that it gave off in waves almost palpable? You might get an idea of how it looked by draping a sheet of brown paper over the back of a creeping turtle. No, that sounds ludicrous. There was nothing funny in the way that parchment moved across the carpet toward us, not a single atom of humor. Gwen had slipped out from under the covers and crouched, all doubled up and panicky against the headboard. Her helpless terror nerved me to defense. Somehow I got out and stood upright on the floor. I am sure that I looked most unheroic with my rumpled hair and my blue pajamas and my bare feet, but I was ready to do battle. Yes, do battle with what? And how? That crawling scrap of parchment had reached the threshold, hunched over the door sill like a very flat and loathly worm. I could see the writing on it, not rusty and faint but black and heavy. Snatching a water glass from the bedside table, I hurled it. The foul thing crumpled suddenly sidewise. The glass splintered to atoms where it had been. Next moment the parchment was humping and creeping faster, almost scampering, toward my bare toes. "Smash it," Gwen choked out. She must have been ready to faint. Against a chair close at hand leaned her little parasol, a feminine thing with a silken tassel at its handle and a ferrule of imitation amber. I seized it and made a violent stab at the horrid invader. My point thrust the center of it against the floor, and for a moment I pinned it there. Then I was able to see in what manner it was changed. At the top was still the Greek word Necronomicon in aged ink, but the Arabic writing that had filled the page below was gone, or transformed. Transformed into English, written large and bold and black as jet. Stooped as I was above it, I read at a glance the first line. 1,000 times since I have yearned to speak that line aloud, to write it down, to do something that would ease my mind of it. But I must not, now or ever. As it was, the world escaped all too narrowly. Who shaped so dreadful a thought? Abdul al-Hazard is but a figment of Lovecraft's imagination, and Lovecraft is human. He could never have dreamed anything like those words that lie upon my mind, I say, like links of a red-hot iron chain. And they were but the beginning of the writing. What could it have been like in full? I dare not surmise. But this much I suddenly knew for the truth, as I tried to crush that horribly alive parchment scrap beneath my inadequate parasol. The formless evil of the centuries had taken form. An author had fancied the book. Hundreds of others had given it fuller being by their own mental images. The new-hatched legend had become a slender but fearsome peg on which terror, creeping over the borderland from its own forbidding realm, could hang itself. Once hung there, it could grow tangible, solid, potent. "Gwen," I warned, "hide your eyes, don't look. Don't read." "What do you mean, don't read?" Her pale face moved closer as she leaned across the bed. "Don't read," I raved at her. "Remember what you've seen already. Chant out the spell and give me life again." The parchment slid slowly out from under the down-pressed parasol. I could hold it no easier than if it had been a moist melon seed. It reached my foot. Ah! It was climbing my leg. What was it up to? Merciful heavens! Would it scale my body as a squirrel scales a tree? Would it drape itself upon my face and force its unspeakable message into my eyes and my mind? Because then I'd have to speak. The burden of it would be too great. My lips would open to ease the torture. Chant out the spell. Chant it out, and the world would be crushed again under the fearsome feet of Cthulhu and his brother horrors of the evil eld. What sins and woes would run loose, at which Satan in hell must hide his shocked face. And it would be I, who spoke the words that released them. I felt faint and dizzy, but I tore the repellent sheathing from my leg. For a moment it clung against my strength, as though with tendrils or suckers. With all my force I dashed it into a metal wastebasket among crumpled heaps of paper. It tried to flop out again, but I pushed it back with the parasol. At the same time, I clutched my cigarette lighter from the bedside table. Thank heaven it worked. It burst into flame. I flung it into the basket. The whole mass of paper burst into fire and smoke. Up from the midst of it rose a faint, throbbing squeak, to be felt rather than heard, like the voice of a bat far away. Deeper into the little furnace I thrust that outcast messenger from the forces that threatened my world. The flames worried it, and it crinkled and thrashed as if in agony, but it did not burn. Prodding it back again and again, I must have shouted something in my despair, for Gwen hurried to the telephone and jabbered into it. "Father Wanell," she cried. "Come quick with holy water." Hanging up, she turned to me. "Is he coming?" I panted. "Yes. He'll be here in 2 minutes." Her voice quavered. But what if the holy water doesn't work? It did work. At the first spatter, the unhallowed page and its prodigious gospel of wickedness vanished into a fluff of ashes. I pray my thankfulness for that, every day that I live. Yet, even as I offer thanks, my troubled mind forms again the question that Gwen asked. What if the holy water had not worked? End of The Terrible Parchment by Manly Wade Wellman. The Letters of Cold Fire by Manly Wade Wellman. Weird Tales, May 1944. The L had once curved around a corner and along this block of the narrow, rough-paved street. Since it had been taken up, the tenements on either side seemed like dissipated old vagabonds, ready to collapse without the support of that scaffolding. Between two such buildings of time-dulled red brick sagged a third, its brickwork thickly coated with cheap yellow paint, that might well be the only thing holding it together. The lower story was taken up by the dingiest of hand laundries, and a side door led to the lodgings above. Rowley Thorne addressed a shabby, dull-eyed landlord in a language both of them knew. "Cavett Leslie is," he began. The landlord shook his head slowly. "Does not leave his bed. The doctor sees him twice a day. Told me there was no hope, but Cavett Leslie won't go to a hospital. Thanks." And Thorne turned to the door. His big hand was on the knob, its fingertips hooked over the edge. He was a figure inordinately bulky but hard, like a barrel on legs. His head was bald, and his nose hooked, making him look like a wise, wicked eagle. "Tell him," he requested, "that a friend was coming to see him." "I never talked to him," said the landlord, and Thorne bowed and left, closing the door behind him. Outside the door he listened. The landlord had gone back into his own dim quarters. Thorne at once tried the knob. The door opened, for in leaving he had taken off the night lock. He stole through the windowless vestibule and mounted stairs so narrow that Thorne's shoulders touched both walls at once. The place had that old clothes smell of New York's ancient slum houses. From such rookeries the 5 Points and Dead Rabbits gangsters had issued to their joyous gang wars of old. Hoodlums had thronged to the draft riots of 1863 and the protest against Macready's performance of Macbeth at the Astor Place Opera House. The hallway above was as narrow as the stairs, and darker, but Thorne knew the way to the door he sought. It opened readily, for its lock was long out of order. It was more a cell than a room. The plaster, painted a dirt-disguising green, fell away in flakes. Filth and cobwebs clogged the one backward-looking window. The man on the shabby cot stirred, sighed, and turned his thin, fungus-white face toward the door. "Who's there?" he quavered wearily. Rowley Thorne knelt quickly beside him, bending close like a bird of prey above a carcass. "You were Cavett Leslie," he said. "Try to remember." A thin twig of a hand crept from under the ragged quilt. It rubbed over closed eyes. "Forbidden," croaked the man. "I'm forbidden to remember. I forget all but. The voice trailed off, then finished with an effort. My lessons. You are Cavett Leslie. I am Rowley Thorn. Rowley Thorn. The voice was stronger, quicker. That name will be great in hell. It will be great on earth, pronounced Rowley Thorn earnestly. I came to get your book. Give it to me, Leslie. It's worth both our lives and more. Don't call me Leslie. I've forgotten Leslie. Since you studied in the deep school, Thorn finished for him. I know. You have the book. It is given to all who finish the studies there. Few finish, moaned the man on the cot. Many begin. Few finish. The school is beneath ground, Thorn said, as if prompting him. Remember. Yes, beneath ground. No light must come. It would destroy what is taught. Once there, the scholar remains until he has been taught, or goes away in the dark. The school book has letters of cold fire, prompted Thorn. Letters of cold fire, echoed the thin voice. They may be read in the dark. Once a day, a trap opens, and a hand shaggy with dark hair thrusts in food. I finished. I was in that school for 7 years, or 100. He broke off, whimpering. Who can say how long? Give me your book, insisted Thorn. It is here somewhere. The man who would not be called Cavett Leslie rose on an elbow. It was a mighty effort for his fleshless body. He still held his eyes tight shut, but turned his face to Thorn's. How do you know? It's my business to know. I say certain spells, and certain voices whisper back. They cannot give me the wisdom I seek, but they say that it is in your book. Give me the book. Not even to you, Rowley Thorn. You are of the kidney of the deep school, but the book is only for those who study in buried darkness for years. For years. The book, said Thorn sharply. His big hand closed on the bony shoulder, his finger ends probed knowingly for a nerve center. The man who had been in the deep school wailed. You hurt me. I came for the book. I'll have it. I'll call on spirits to protect me. Doctor. What else he may have said was muddled into a moan as Thorn shifted his hand to clamp over the trembling mouth. He imprisoned the skinny jaw as a hostler with a horse and shoved Cavett Leslie's head down against the mattress. With his other thumb, he pried up an eyelid. Convulsively, the tormented one freed his mouth for a moment. Oh, he whined. Don't make me see the light, not after so many years. The book, said Thorn once more, or I'll prop your eyelids open with toothpicks and let the light burn into your brain. Dr. Tarvaron. Thorn stopped the mouth as before, and again pried up a lid. When the gaunt figure still twitched, he pinned it with pressure of his weight. The book. If you'll give it up, hold up a finger. A hand trembled, closed, all but the forefinger. Thorn released his grip. Where? In the mattress. At once, and with all his strength, Thorn chopped down with the hard edge of his hand, full at the bobbing, trembling throat. It was like an axe on a knotted log. The man who had been Cavett Leslie writhed, gasped, and slackened abruptly. Thorn caught at a meagre wrist, his fingers seeking the pulse. He stood silent for a minute, then nodded and smiled to himself. Finished, he muttered. That throat chop is better than a running noose. He tumbled the body from the cot, felt quickly all over the mattress. His hand paused at a lump, tore at the ticking. He drew into view a book, not larger than a school speller. It was bound in some sort of dark, untanned hide, on which grew rank, coarse hair, black as soot. Thorn thrust it under his coat and went out. John Thunstone sat alone in his study. It was less of a study than a lounge. No fewer than 3 chairs were arranged on the floor, soft, well-hollowed chairs within easy reach of bookshelf, smoking stand, and coffee table. There was a leather-covered couch as well, for Thunstone considered work of the brain to be as fatiguing as work of the body. He liked physical comfort when writing or researching. Just now he sat in the most comfortable of the 3 chairs, facing a grate in which burned one of the few authentic fires of New York. He was taller than Rowley Thorne and quite as massive, perhaps even harder of body though not as tense. His face, with its broken nose and small, trim mustache, might have been that of a very savage and physical-minded man, except for the height of the well-combed cranium above it. That made his head the head of a thinker. His hands were so large that one looked twice to see that they were fine. His dark eyes could be brilliant, frank, enigmatic, narrow or laughing as they willed. Open on his lap lay a large grey book with a backing of gilt-lettered red. He pondered a passage on the page open before him. Having shuffled and cut the cards as here described, select one at random. Study the device upon it for such time as you count a slow 20. Then fix your eyes on a point before you, and gaze unwinkingly and without moving, until it seems that a closed door is before you, with upon its panel the device of the card you have chosen. Clarify the image in your mind, and keep it there until the door seems to swing open, and you feel that you can enter and see, hear, or otherwise experience what may happen beyond that door. Similar, pondered John Thunstone, to the Chinese wizard game of Yi King, as investigated and experimented upon by W.B. Seabrook. He was glad that he, and not someone less fitted for such studies, had happened upon the book and the strange cards in that Brooklyn junk shop. Perhaps this was an anglicized form of the Y King book. He said over in his mind, the strange, archaic doggerel penned by some unknown hand on the flyleaf. This book is mine, with many more, of evilness and dismal lore, that I may of the devil know, and school myself to work him woe. Such lore St. Dunstan also read, so that the cross hath firmer stead. My path with honour aye hath been, no better is than that, I ween. Who had written it? What had befallen him, that he sold his strange book in a second-hand store? Perhaps, if the spell would open a spirit door, Thunstone would know. He cut the cards on the stand beside him. The card he saw was stamped with a simple coloured drawing of a grotesque half-human figure covered with spines and flaunting bat wings. Thunstone smiled slightly, sagged down in the chair, his eyes, narrowing, fixed themselves in the heart of the red flame. The illusion came sooner than he had thought. At first it was tiny, like the decorated lid of a cigar box, then grew and grew in size and clarity, shutting out, it seemed, even the firelight into which Thunstone had stared. It seemed green and massive, and the bat-winged figure upon it glowed dully, as if it were a life-size inlay of mother-of-pearl. He fixed his attention upon it, found his eyes quartering the door surface to seek the knob or latch. They saw it, something like a massive metal hook. After a moment, the door swung open, as if the weight of his gaze had pushed it inward. He remembered what the book then directed: arise from your body and walk through the door. But he felt no motion, physical or spiritual, for through the open door he saw only his study, the half of his study that was behind his back, reflected as in a mirror. No, for in a mirror left would become right. Here was the rearward part of the room exactly as he knew it. And not empty. A moving, stealthy blackness was there, flowing or creeping across the rug between a chair and a smoking stand like an octopus on a sea bottom. Thunstone watched. It was not a cloud nor a shadow, but something solid if not clearly shaped. It came into plainer view closer, at the very threshold of the envisioned door. There it began to rise, a towering, lean manifestation of blackness. It came to Thunstone's mind that, if the scene within the doorway was faithfully a reproduction of the room behind him, then he could see to it almost the exact point where his own chair was placed. In other words, if something dark and indistinct and stealthy was uncoiling itself there, the something was directly behind where he sat. He did not move, did not even quicken his breath. The shape, it had a shape now, like a leafless tree with a narrow starved stem and moving tendril-like branches, aspired almost to the ceiling of the vision room. The tendrils swayed, as if in a gentle wind, then writhed and drooped. Drooped toward the point where might be the head of a seated man. If such a thing were truly behind him, it was reaching toward his head. Thunstone threw himself forward from the chair, straight at the vision door. As he came well away from where he had sat, he whipped his big body straight, and cat-like, despite his wrestler's bulk, spun around on the balls of his feet. Of the many strange spells and charms he had read in years of strange study, one came to his lips, from the Egyptian secrets. "Stand still, in the name of heaven. Give neither fire nor flame nor punishment." He saw the black shadowy shape, tall behind his chair, its crowning tendrils dangling down in the very space which his body had occupied. The light of the sinking fire made indistinct its details and outlines, but for the instant it was solid. Thunstone knew better than to retreat a step before such a thing, but he was within arm's reach of a massive old desk. A quick clutch and heave opened a drawer. He thrust in his hand and closed it on a slender stick, no more than a rough-cut billet of whitethorn. Lifting the bit of wood like a dagger, he moved toward the half-blurred intruder. He thrust outward with the pointed end of the whitethorn stick. "I command, I compel in the name of," began Thunstone. The entity writhed. Its tendrils spread and hovered, so that it seemed for the moment like a gigantic scrawny arm, spreading its fingers to signal for mercy. Even as Thunstone glared and held out his whitethorn, the black outline lost its clarity, dissolving as ink dissolves in water. The darkness became grey, stirred together and shrank away toward the door. It seemed to filter between panel and jamb. The air grew clearer, and Thunstone wiped his face with the hand that did not hold the whitethorn. He stooped and picked up the book that had spilled from his lap. He faced the fire. The door, if it had ever existed otherwise than in Thunstone's mind, had gone like the tendril shape. Thunstone took a pipe from his smoking stand and put it in his mouth. His face was deadly pale, but the hand that struck a match was as steady as a bronze bracket. Thunstone placed the book carefully on the desk. "Whoever you are who wrote the words," he said aloud, "and wherever you are at this moment, thank you for helping me to warn myself." He moved around the study, peering at the rug on which that shadow image had reared itself, prodding the pile, even kneeling to sniff. He shook his head. No sign, no trace. Yet for a moment it was real and potent enough. Only one person I know has the wit and will to attack me like that. He straightened up. Rowley Thorn. Leaving the study, John Thunstone donned hat and coat. He descended through the lobby of his apartment house and stopped a taxi on the street outside. "Take me to 88 Musgrave Lane, in Greenwich Village," he directed the driver. The little bookshop looked like a dingy cave. To enter it, Thunstone had to go down steps from the sidewalk, past an almost obliterated sign that read, "Books, all kinds." Below ground, the cave motif was emphasized. It was as though one entered a ragged grotto among peculiar natural deposits of books, shelves, stands, tables, and heaps of them on the floor like outcroppings. A bright, naked bulb hung at the end of a ceiling cord, but it seemed to shed light only in the outer room. No beam, apparently, could penetrate beyond a threshold at the rear, yet Thunstone had, as always, the non-visual sense of a greater book cave there, wherein perhaps clumps of volumes hung somehow from the ceiling, like stalactites. "I thought you'd be here, Mr. Thunstone," came a genial snarl from a far corner, and the old proprietress stumped forward. She was heavy-set, shabby, white-haired, but had a proud beaked face and eyes and teeth like a girl of 20. "Professor Rhine and Joseph Dunninger can write the books and give the exhibitions of thought transference. I just sit here and practice it with people whose minds can tune into mine, like you, Mr. Thunstone. You came, I dare say, for a book." "Suppose," said Thunstone, "that I wanted a copy of the Necronomicon?" "Suppose," rejoined the old woman, "that I gave it to you." She turned to a shelf, pulled several books out, and poked her withered hand into the recess behind. Nobody else that I know would be able to look into the Necronomicon without getting into trouble. To anyone else, the price would be prohibitive. To you, Mr. Thun. Leave that book where it is, he bade her sharply. She glanced up with her bright, youthful eyes, slid the volumes back into their place, and turned to wait for what he would say. I knew you had it, said Thunstone. I wanted to be sure that you still had it, and that you would keep it. I'll keep it, unless you ever want it, promised the old woman. Does Rowley Thorn ever come here? Thorn? The man like a burly old bald eagle. Not for months. He hasn't the money to pay the prices I'd ask him for even cheap reprints of Albertus Magnus. Goodbye, Mrs. Harlan, said Thunstone. You're very kind. So are you kind, said the old woman, to me and to countless others. When you die, Mr. Thunstone, and may it be long ever from now, a whole generation will pray your soul into glory. Could I say something? Please do. He paused in the act of going. Thorn came here once to ask me a favor. It was about a poor sick man who lives, if you can call it living, in a tenement across town. His name was Cavate Leslie, and Thorn said he would authorize me to pay any price for a book Cavate Leslie had. Not the Necronomicon? Prompted Thunstone. Her white head shook. Thorn asked for the Necronomicon the day before, and I said I hadn't one to sell him, which was the truth. I had it in mind that he thought Cavate Leslie's book might be a substitute. The name of Leslie's book? She crinkled her face until it looked like a wise walnut. He said it had no name. I was to say to Leslie, your school book. Hummed Thunstone. Frowning. What was the address? She wrote it on a bit of paper. Thunstone took it and smiled down. Goodbye again, Mrs. Harlan. Some books must be kept in existence, I know, despite their danger. My sort of scholarship needs them. But you're the best and wisest person to keep them. She stared after him for moments following his departure. A black cat came silently forth and rubbed its head against her. If I was really to do magic with these books, she told the animal, I'd cut 40 years off my age, and take John Thunstone clear away from that Countess Montesecco, who will never do him justice. There was not much to learn at the place where Cavate Leslie had kept his poor lodgings. The landlord could not understand English, and Thunstone had to try 2 other languages before he learned that Leslie had been ill, had been under treatment by a charity physician, and had died earlier that day, apparently from some sort of throttling spasm. For $1, Thunstone gained permission to visit the squalid death chamber. The body was gone, and Thunstone probed into every corner of the room. He found the ripped mattress, pulled away the flap of ticking, and studied the rectangular recess among the wads of ancient padding. A book had been there. He touched the place. It had a strange chill. Then he turned quickly, gazing across the room. Some sort of shape had been there, a shape that faded as he turned, but which left an impression. Thunstone whistled softly. Mrs. Harlan couldn't get the book, he decided. Thorn came, and succeeded. Now, which way to Thorn? The street outside was dark. Thunstone stood for a moment in front of the dingy tenement, until he achieved again the sense of something watching, approaching. He turned again, and saw or sensed the shrinking away of a stealthy shadow. He walked in that direction. The sense of the presence departed, but he walked on in the same direction, until he had a feeling of aimlessness in the night. Then again he stood, with what unconcern he could make apparent, until there was a whisper in his consciousness of threat. Whirling, he followed it as before. Thus he travelled for several blocks, changing direction once. Whatever was spying upon him or seeking to ambush him, it was retreating toward a definite base of operations. At length, he was able to knock upon a certain door in a certain hotel. Rowley Thorn opened to him, standing very calm and even triumphant in waistcoat and shirt-sleeves. "Come in, Thunstone," he said in mocking cordiality. "This is more than I had dared hope for. I was able to face and chase your hound thing, whatever it is, Thunstone told him, entering. It led me here. I knew that, nodded Thorn, his shaven head gleaming dully in the brown-seeming light of a single small desk lamp. Won't you make yourself comfortable? You see? And he took up a shaggy-covered book from the arm of an easy chair. I am impelled at last to accept the idea of a writing which, literally, tells one everything he needs to know. You killed Cavie Leslie for it, didn't you? Inquired Thunstone, and dropped his hat on the bed. Thorn clicked his tongue. That's bad luck for somebody, a hat on the bed. Cavie Leslie had outlived everything but a scrap of his physical self. Somewhere he's outliving that, for I take it that his experiences and studies have unfitted his soul for any conventional hereafter. But he left me a rather amusing legacy, and he dropped his eyes to the open book. I should be flattered that you concentrated first of all in immobilizing me, observed Thunstone, leaning his great shoulder against the door jamb. Flattered? But surely not surprised. After all, you've hampered me again and again in reaping a harvest of... Come off it, Thorn. You're not even honest as a worshipper of evil. You don't care whether you establish a cult of Satan or not. Thorn pursed his hard lips. I venture to say you're right. I'm not a zealot. Cavie Leslie was. He entered the deep school. Know about it? I do, Thunstone told him. Held in a cellar below a cellar. Somewhere on this continent I'll find it someday, and put an end to the curriculum. Leslie entered the deep school, Thorn continued, and finished all the study it had to offer. He finished himself as a being capable of happiness too. He could not look at the light, or summon the strength to walk, or even sit. Probably death was a relief to him, though not knowing what befell him after death, we cannot be certain. What I'm summing up to is that he endured that wretched life underground to get the gift of this textbook. Now I have it, without undergoing so dreadful an ordeal. Don't reach out for it, Thunstone. You couldn't read it anyway. He held it forward, open. The pages showed dull and blank. They're written in letters of cold fire, reminded Thunstone. Letters that show only in the dark. Shall we make it dark then? Thorn switched off the lamp. Thunstone, who had not stirred from his lounging stance at the door, was aware at once that the room was completely sealed. Blackness was absolute. He could not even judge dimensions or directions. Thorn spoke again, from the midst of the choking gloom. Clever of you, staying beside the door. Do you want to try to leave? It's no good running away from evil, Thunstone replied. I didn't come to run away again. But try to open the door. Thorn almost begged, and Thunstone put out his hand to find the knob. There was no knob, and no door. Suddenly, Thunstone was aware that he was not leaning against a door jamb anymore. There was no door jamb or other solidity against which to lean. Don't you wish you knew where you were? Jeered Thorn. I'm the only one who knows, for it's written here on the page for me to see, in letters of cold fire. Thunstone took a stealthy step in the direction of the voice. When Thorn spoke again, he had evidently fallen back out of reach. Shall I describe the place for you, Thunstone? It's in the open somewhere. A faint breeze blows, and as he spoke, Thunstone felt the breeze, warm and feeble, like the breath of some disgusting little animal. And around us are bushes and trees. They're part of a thick growth, but just here they are sparse. Because, not more than a dozen steps away, is open country. I've brought you to the borderland of a most interesting place, Thunstone, merely by speaking of it. Thunstone took another step. His feet were on loose earth, not on carpet. A pebble turned and rattled under his shoe sole. You're where you always wanted to be, he called to Thorn, where by saying a thing you can make it so. But many things will need to be said before life suits you. He tried a third step, silently this time. Who will believe? Everybody will believe. Thorn was almost airy. Once a fact is demonstrated, it is no longer wonderful. Hypnotism was called magic in its time, and became accepted science. So it is being achieved with thought transference, by experimentation at Duke University and on radio programs in New York. So it will be when I tell of my writings, very full and very clear. But haven't we been too long in utter darkness? On the instant, Thunstone could see a little. Afterwards, he tried to decide what color that light, or mock light, actually was. Perhaps it was a lizardy green, but he was never sure. It revealed, ever so faintly, the leafless, stunted growths about him, the bare, dry-seeming ground from which they sprang, and the clearing beyond them. He could not be sure of the horizon or sky. Something moved, not far off, Thorn, by the silhouette. Thunstone saw the flash of Thorn's eyes, as though they gave their own light. "This country," Thorn said, "may be one of several places. Another dimension. Do you believe in more dimensions than these? Or a spirit world of some kind? Or another age of the world we know? I brought you here, Thunstone, without acting or even speaking, only by reading in my book." Thunstone carefully slid a hand inside his pocket. His forefinger touched something smooth, heavy, rectangular. He knew what it was, a lighter, given to him on an occasion of happy gratitude by Sharon, the Countess Montesecco. "Cold fire," Thorn was saying. "These letters and words are of a language known only in the deep school, but the sight of them is enough to convey knowledge. Enough, also, to create and direct. This land is spacious enough, don't you think, to support other living creatures than ourselves?" Thunstone made out blots of black gloom in the green gloom of the clearing. Immense, gross blots that moved slowly but knowingly toward the bushes. And somewhere behind him, a great massive bulk made a dry crashing in the strange shrubbery. "Are such things hungry?" mused Thorn. "They will be if I make them so by a thought. Thunstone, I think I've done enough to occupy you. Now I'm ready to leave you here, also by a thought, taking with me the book with letters of cold fire." "You can't have that cold fire." "I have warm fire," said Thunstone, and threw himself. It was a powerful lunge, unthinkably swift. Thunstone is, among other things, a trained athlete. His big body crashed against Thorn's, and the two of them grappled and went sprawling among the brittle twigs of one of the bushes. As Thorn fell undermost, he flung up the hand that held the book, as if to put it out of Thunstone's reach. But Thunstone's hand shot out too, and it held something. The lighter. A flick of his thumb, and flame sprang out, warm orange flame in a sudden spurting tongue that for a moment licked into the coarse, shaggy hair of the untanned hide that bound the book. Thorn howled and dropped the thing. A moment later he pulled loose and jumped up. Thunstone was up too, moving to block Thorn off from the book. Flame grew and flurried behind him, into a paler light, as if burning something fat and rotten. "It'll be ruined," cried Thorn, and hurled himself low, like a blocker on the football field. An old footballer himself, Thunstone crouched, letting his hard knee joint come in contact with Thorn's in-charging bald skull. With a grunt, Thorn fell flat, rolled over, and came erect again. "Put out that fire, Thunstone," he bawled. "You may destroy us both." "I'll chance that," Thunstone muttered, moving again to fence him off from the burning book. Thorn returned to the struggle. One big hand made a talon of itself, snatching at Thunstone's face. Thunstone ducked beneath the hand, jammed his own shoulder up under the pit of the lifted arm, and heaved. Thorn staggered back, stumbled. He fell and came to his hands and knees, waiting. His face, upturned to Thunstone, was like a mask of horror carved to terrorize the worshippers in some temple of demons. It was plain to see that face, for the fire of the book blazed up with a last ardent leap of radiance. Then it died. Thunstone, taking time to glance, saw only glowing charred fragments of leaves, and ground them with a quick thrust of his heel. Darkness again, without even the green mock light. Thunstone felt no breeze, heard no noise of swaying bushes or stealthy ponderous shape movement. He could not even hear Thorn's breathing. He took a step sideways, groping. His hand found a desk edge, then the standard of a small lamp. He found a switch and pressed it. Again he was in Thorn's hotel room, and Thorn was groggily rising to his feet. When Thorn had cleared his head by shaking it, Thunstone had taken a sheaf of papers from the desk and was glancing quickly through them. "Suppose," he said, gently but loftily, "that we call the whole thing a little trick of imagination. If you call it that, you will be lying," Thorn said between set teeth, on which blood was smeared. "A lie told in a good cause is the whitest of lies. This writing would be a document of interest if it would convince." "The book," muttered Thorn. "The book would convince. I whisked you to a land beyond imagination with only a grain of the power that book held." "What book?" inquired Thunstone. He looked around. "There's no book. You set it afire. It burned in that place where we fought. Its ashes remain while we come back here because its power is gone." Thunstone glanced down at the papers he had picked up. "Why talk of burning things? I wouldn't burn this set of notes for anything. It will attract other attentions than mine." His eyes rose to fix Thorn's. "Well, you fought me again, Thorn, and I turned you back. He who fights and runs away." Roly Thorn found the strength to laugh. "You know the rest, Thunstone. You have to let me run away this time, and at our next fight I'll know better how to deal with you." "You shan't run away," said Thunstone. He put a cigarette in his mouth and kindled it with a lighter he still held in his hand. Thorn hooked his heavy thumbs in his vest. "You'll stop me?" "I think not, because we're back in conventional lands, Thunstone. If you lay hands on me again, it'll be a fight to the death. We're both big and strong. You might kill me, but I'd see that you did. Then you'd be punished for murder, perhaps executed." Thorn's pale, pointed tongue licked his hard lips. "Nobody would believe you if you tried to explain." "No, nobody would believe," agreed Thunstone gently. "That's why I'm leaving you to do the explaining." "Aye!" cried Thorn, and laughed again. "Explain what? To whom?" "On the way here," said Thunstone, "I made a plan. In the lobby downstairs, I telephoned for someone to follow me. No, not the police. A doctor. This will be the doctor now." A slim, grey-eyed man was coming in. Behind him moved two blocky, watchful attendants in white jackets. Silently, Thunstone handed the doctor the papers that he had taken from the desk. The doctor looked at the first page, then the second. His grey eyes brightened with professional interest. Finally, he approached Thorn. "Are you the gentleman Mr. Thunstone asked me to see?" he inquired. "You. Yes. You look rather weary and overwrought. Perhaps a rest, with nothing to bother you." Thorn's face writhed. You dare to suggest—" He made a threatening gesture but subsided as the two white-coated men moved toward him from either side. "You're insolent," he went on, more quietly. "I'm no more crazy than you are." "Of course not," agreed the doctor. He looked at the notes again, grunted, folded the sheets, and stowed them carefully in an inside pocket. Thunstone gave a little nod of general farewell, took his hat from the bed, and strolled carelessly out. "Of course you're not crazy," said the doctor again. "Only tired. Now, if you'll answer a question or two." "What questions?" blazed Thorn. "Well, is it true that you believe you can summon spirits and work miracles merely by exerting your mind?" Thorn's wrath exploded hysterically. "You'd soon see what I could do if I had that book." "What book?" "Thunstone destroyed it, burned it." "Oh, please," begged the doctor good-naturedly. "You're talking about John Thunstone, you know. There isn't any book. There never was a book. You need a rest, I tell you. Come along." Thorn howled like a beast and clutched at his tormentor. The doctor moved smoothly out of reach. "Bring him out to the car," said the doctor to the two men in white coats. At once they slid into close quarters, each clutching one of Thorn's arms. He snarled and struggled, but the men, with practiced skill, clamped and twisted his wrists. Subdued, he walked out between them because he must. Thunstone and the Countess Montesecco were having cocktails at their favorite rear table in a 47th Street restaurant. They were known and liked there, and not even a waiter would disturb them unless signaled for. "Tell me," said the Countess, "what sort of fantastic danger were you tackling last night?" "I was in no danger." John Thunstone smiled. "But I know you were. I went to the concert and then the reception, but all the time I had the most overpowering sense of your struggle and peril. I was wearing the cross you gave me, and I held it in my hand and prayed for you. Prayed hour after hour. That," said Thunstone, "was why I was in no danger." End of the Letters of Cold Fire by manly Wade Wellman. This is the end of the story. Tell us what you think in the comment section. Please subscribe and ring the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we release new content. If you want to support us, consider joining our channel membership. You will get instant early access to more than 100 stories before their release. This is the only way to support our channel.